Hi, I'm Whitney Ross, and with me today is Tom Rasnick. Tom, thank you for joining me.
Thanks, Whitney.
Yeah, I thought we'd just continue what we've been doing and talking a little bit about the sermon and a little beyond what maybe you shared during the service. And this morning, we had talked earlier in the week just about this scripture passage specifically and how loaded it is, how much inside of it there really was. How did you decide what to focus on in this passage?
So I read the passage just over, and I must have read it 20 times. And I kind of just took it into my prayer life meditation and just tried to see what was bubbling up, what came up. And that's the direction I went with We Are One is what stuck out to me the most. As you say, there's a million ways you could have gone with that, and we didn't have time for that.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's that idea of oneness or that unity that Jesus is speaking about, and kind of in his prayer for the followers at that point, is definitely a very timely message, just given our world that we're in and just the day-to-day challenges that we have. And you had shared a story to kind of help bring that into focus of that idea of how we view ourselves and how we view others, and especially around that idea of us being in each other.
So the story is about a high-powered lawyer. This guy was the guy. High-powered, successful. And this guy wanted his daughter, more than anything, he wanted his daughter to go to Duke. So, just to give you a picture of this guy, he never lost a case. He was the guy you wanted if you had to go to court. This was the dude. And he took all of that competitive energy, all of that focus, all of that intensity, and he applied it to everything in his life, including his daughter. Okay, so just full bore. His daughter was a junior in high school. And he thought, man, she is just not doing enough to get into Duke. She's got to pick it up. But no matter how hard he pushed her, she just wouldn't do what he wanted her to do. So he was at his wit's end. I mean, she was getting good grades. She got B's throughout most of her classes, and she got A's in classes like art and music, which gives you a sense of who she was, what she was interested in. But her father, once again, just didn't think she was a good student. She just wasn't great. And to get into Duke, you had to be great. So he went to this psychologist who was leading the workshop. And he said, I want your job is to help me get my daughter into Duke. It's always nice to know what your job is. So get my daughter into Duke. And the psychologist said, well, can't make any promises, but we'll run some tests, we'll meet with her, we'll spend the day and see what we come up with, and then we'll talk about it, okay? So that was the deal. After a full day of testing, the psychologist and the lawyer, the father, went and met in a separate room, and the psychologist said, well, we have thoroughly enjoyed being with your daughter. She's just a delight. She's smart, she's witty, she's creative, and she just has this joy for living. She will do well in college. You don't have to worry about that. But the highly competitive, stress-filled academic environment of a place like Duke, that's probably going to crush her spirit. So, based on our time with her, including asking her preferences, we believe she needs a smaller, a less competitive environment, and then she'll flourish. She'll just flourish. You know what happened? You do? He fired him. He fired him. He said, well, if you can't get her into Duke, I'll find someone who can.
Could you share some about that?
Yeah, the way that I go about looking at life is if I can see something in you that has an effect on me in some way, or anybody else, then what I think is, what I've come to believe, is that that's touched something in me, that there's something inside of me that what I'm seeing, and once again, it's usually the things that I have a strong reaction, either a strong positive reaction or a strong negative reaction, that somewhere in my own being, that is there. So if I'm looking at somebody and I think, wow, that's an angry person, and I get real worked up about it, then I have to realize, oh, well, I'm an angry person sometimes. So that's
Yeah, so really asking yourself, why am I having the reaction I'm having?
Yeah.
And just thinking through that.
Yeah. But what's going on?
Yeah.
That what that person just did, or regardless of what it is, in many ways, had made me have such a strong reaction.
I had a situation the other day where I was in a business, and the person in front of me was treating the people that were waiting on them very unkind. And it just kind of grew and became more unkind and more unkind. And it's one of those things where I was really uncomfortable just kind of observing that, and even felt the desire to apologize to the people that had been serving that person, and I found myself getting really agitated by the situation. But then found myself coming back to the idea of, I wonder what was happening with that person that was expressing that anger, that was really agitated themselves. Have no idea what had happened to them just before they came in, or what they had been dealing with, or just what reaction they were having. And I think that causes us to pause so many times to reflect on that, but then also reflect on ourselves.
Yeah, because there could be some days where, as bad as that sounds, it might not have gotten quite the same reaction. And we don't know. That's just it. We don't know what everybody else is dealing with or what's going on. And so sometimes in a flash, I might make an assumption about something that's not really true.
Every time I tell this story, and I told it this morning, and I'm telling it now, and I still have the same reaction. My stomach, I just get this pit in my stomach. It's just, in my mind, what I'm thinking is, what an absolutely awful human being. He's the epitome of what's wrong with the world today. That guy. People who think their way is the only way. People who try to fit others into their own narrow idea of what they should be. What an absolute jerk, that guy. That guy needs Jesus. Well, and especially he needs to hear today's gospel, where Jesus says, in effect, let them be one as we are one. Let them be one as we are one. He really needs to hear that. You see, and so do I. Because I'm doing the same thing to him that he's doing to his daughter. I'm trying to make him be what I think he should be. The truth is, I don't really know anything about the guy. And yet, I've already made him into the problem with the world. He's there he is, the problem with the world, right there. You see, and when I do that, I create an us versus them mentality, an us versus them worldview. You know what that is? So there's us, everybody who agrees with me. That's us. And then there's them, everybody who's wrong.
And we tend to be drawn to that us versus them that you talked about. That seems to be something that we have to kind of work against, our own tendency to want to categorize so quickly.
Yeah. And especially at times, in my view, we're in a time of tremendous change. There's a lot of things changing. There's a lot of things. If you took just the climate crisis that we're going through and COVID, or even just one of those things, that's a lot to deal with. Psychologically, it's a lot for us to try to understand and react to things as big as that. And we've got that, plus all the other things that are going on in our social world, in our institutional life. And when things like that, when there's that much turmoil, I think it's natural for people to look for places where there's not turmoil, and places where everybody's of the same mind tends to be one of those places. And that gets the whole us, I'm a part of this group is good, and they define who and what I am. So all these changes don't have as much of an impact.
Yeah. One of the other concepts that you spoke to that I'd like to talk a little bit more about is the idea of each person being unique, but somehow mysteriously connected.
Yeah.
I think it's a big thing to get your head around.
I really believe this. What this gospel, at least that piece of this gospel, is really trying to show us. Because for me, it's really trying to show us that even though each one of us is a unique individual, and we are that, even though we are a unique individual, we are mysteriously connected to each other. We are interconnected in some mysterious way. We who are many really are one. We're both of those. As so many of you said in your responses, and thank you for your responses to the questions about the sermon or about the gospel, as so many of you responded, being one is not about all being the same. It's not about always agreeing. Being one is about each of us living our own unique lives, using the particular gifts we each have, while remembering that we really are interconnected. We really are parts of a whole in many ways. Simply put, and this is the simplest way I can put it, it might confuse you, but it's very simple for me. So here it is. A part of you is in me. A part of you is in me. A part of me is in you. A part of God is in each of us. And together, we are manifesting God to the world.
This is just what popped into my head. One way to look at it is, so in the West, we have championed the individual. We have and looked at life really mostly from the place of autonomy and independence and individuality, all of which is good and has its positive things. It's certainly good for, or at least has the potential to be good for human rights, to say each person is worthwhile and as an individual. While no analogy is perfect, but the East is more of a collective world, that somehow or another what's good for the group is good for the individual. And somehow or another those two things have to blend, I think, in order to be the global world we are right now. Somehow or another. And that's the way that I go about trying to talk about it, based on some things that I've read and stuff that I've paid attention to. And that is, yes, we are each unique. There is a unique me who's trying to live out my particular life. But we're also a group. We're also connected. And the connection is, for the simplest thing I would be, is just by virtue of being human.
Okay.
So you could see it as DNA if you want, which then connects us to everything else too. But
Right.
and all sorts of spiritual traditions try to get at this, really try to get at this, yes, we're an individual, and yes, we're connected to the larger world. And it's not just it's the way we're made. It's how we are.
And you mentioned the idea that there's a part of God in each of us as well. You know, and I think as we view others or we're around others, seeking that out, looking for that, being watchful of where is it? What is it? What connection do I have with this person that maybe I don't sense right away?
Yeah.
That's deeper, that's there. And how do we get to it? How do we uncover that?
Yeah, and I think that, just what you're saying, how I think we uncover it is time and effort and not jumping to conclusions, and all the things that it takes to have a relationship, to really get to know somebody,
Yeah.
Including yourself.
Yeah.
So there's the external, watching somebody and all the things that we've just kind of touched on. But there's also the internal. Okay, so the internal world is the world of where spirituality really thrives. That what's going on inside of us has influence on, and if not, completely affects the way we see outside of us. Okay, so part of, like I said before, me seeing something of myself in you, once again, is in a sense trying to help me own who I am, own what's going on inside of me, own what's happening in the person that I'm becoming, and that's part of what people call spiritual growth, growth in faith, however you want to phrase it, because it's always this internal, external dance going on. It's always going on. And once again, we're in the West, so we tend to see it externally. So we'll tend to focus on that person or that thing, or, right? But there's just as much, if not more, to focus on inside.
And I think sometimes we can be uncomfortable with the unfinished nature of ourselves.
Yes.
Because we like completion, we like clarity, we like things to have clear definition, and to really be in that spiritual growth journey kind of mindset of the idea that we're growing, developing, understanding more of who we are. It's not necessarily our default at times.
To see inside.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think for most of us, it's harder to do.
Right.
It's harder to say, well, perhaps the issue is inside of me, not outside of me.
Yeah.
And all that gets into in the Christian tradition with big words like repent and sin even, and things like that, where it's just really just trying to say, or Jesus' thing about, well, take the log out of your own eye before you take the speck out of your neighbor's eye. That's a very, very insightful thing to say way back in the day, that's trying to say, look in first. And then that'll help you to look out. And maybe I won't be so critical of that which is outside of me. But in the heat of the moment, that's very, very difficult to do.
Yeah.
It's usually what we do is lash out. And a lot of times what ends up happening is you just get a whole series of opinions about things, which are fine, but then it's which opinion is best and which isn't best, as opposed to, well, wait, let's step back so that we can see the situation more clearly. And maybe if I can step back and get my own stuff out of the way as best I can, I'll be able to see it a little clearer.
Yeah.
So, but like I said, that is more of an Eastern way too. That the person I'm trying to affect is myself, rather than somebody else.
Yeah. That's definitely a different way.
That's right. And like I said, and I just think we're at a time where it's not that one is bad. It's just that the two have to go together somehow. Blending what seems like can't be blended.
Yeah. Interesting.
And that's the whole thing of, I'm an individual, but yet I'm connected. It's like another one of the example of the individual connected thing. Somebody wrote to me about the questions that I asked on, prior to the sermon, and she said, it's like a grove of aspen trees. If you look at the grove of aspen trees on the outside, they look like a bunch of individual trees, but underneath, the roots are connected, and they're connected to the same source, and it's like that. It's like that.
It's both and.
It's both and.
Yeah.
And that once again, in the spiritual world, most everything is both and. And in the day-to-day world, we have to make decisions and choices, and that splits the world.
Yeah.
and understandably. But it's just when it comes to then what the sermon's talking about with us being one, well, then that's time to move away from the day-to-day way that I usually go about living, my day-to-day judgments and making decisions and that kind of thing, and move into the both and.
So making space even in your day for
That's
both.
right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Well, thank you.
All
Appreciate
right.
the time.
You're welcome.
Always enjoy getting a chance to talk with you
Yeah.
about these things. So
Yeah.
appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.